Hi, I'd like to welcome you to Storage Developer Conference 2015. We took a few minutes out to come up to the party suite to have a little discussion about SMIS and its future in data centers. With me, I have, my name is Chris Leonetti. I'm the chair for the SMIS group. And I'd like to welcome my guests here. We have...
Hi, I'm Rochelle Olvers with Avago Technologies. And we also have...
Hi, I'm Vaughn Stewart, Chief Evangelist at Pure Storage, and wrapping up the panel is...
My name is Jay Metz. I'm a R&D engineer at Cisco, and we have... Oh, that's it. Sorry.
And I don't need the mic, I'm mic'd. And we have, I'm Chris Leonetti with NetApp. I'm a reference architect. So what we wanted to discuss today was a little bit about SMIS, and specifically about the fact that it's a pretty old protocol. I mean, it's going on, what, 14?
14, 15 years now, yep.
Yeah. And you've been playing with it since pretty much the beginning, haven't you?
I was there before the beginning, yes.
So I remember, I think I started messing with it about version 1.1 or 1.2, and it started getting popular, and then it seemed to dip in the middle. And where now? Where are we at?
Well, it's been pretty stable for several years now, and you know, there have been some really, really good implementations for at least 5 or 6 years. So, but we can talk about the very beginning. In fact, before the beginning, you know, it took SMIS a while to figure out exactly how we wanted to proceed. But you know, we weren't really the only ones. That was going on in you know, server management, network management as well. You know, SMIS started out trying for a few years to figure out what approach we actually wanted to take and how comprehensive we really wanted to be. So we finally settled on SIM, the Common Information Model, recognizing it was very complex, but also recognizing we wanted to have an object model-based approach. And that's something that was also happening in the management space, the server management space at the same time. So we wanted some consistency across the industry. And so that was, you know, back in the late 90s, really. So it's something that's been, you know, that's been working for quite a long time. And so it took a couple, 3 years for that to get settled, for folks to figure out how to do SIM modeling, and for SMIS, you know, 1.0, 1.1 to really get a foothold. We started working with, you know, fundamentally with block storage first, and you know, with a lot of plans to expand to the other types of storage.
Got it. So how is this different than the server standards you see? I mean, seems to be server standards. I remember DCIM. I remember there's been a number of server standards over the years.
Well, so yeah. So one of the things that's really been a, you know, kind of compare contrast between the two was that you know, SMIS kind of stuck with one standard, and it took kind of a lot of fits and starts to get there. But SMIS kind of persevered through that, and we really have had really broad scale industry adoption in the storage space with SMIS, and it did take several years for us to get there. And on the server side, they have tried multiple different incarnations, but really never ended up with a good broad-scale adoption of any of the standards. Even though they tried multiple incarnations, and you know, to their credit, they've tried several different incarnations, and they're, you know, got another one in the works right now that they're trying. So, you know, SMIS is a big, hefty standard and covers a lot of different product types. But
it's kind of the de facto standard right now.
It really is the de facto standard there.
Yep. And let's ask Vaughn here. Pure Storage is actually a recent joiner of SMIS. You guys are now voting members on the SMIS board, and you joined specifically to write an SMIS or SSM provider. Where do you see that helping you? How do you see that assisting you in the future?
Sure. So thanks for having us in the video. Appreciate that. At Pure Storage, we look at SMIS as a way that helps accelerate the adoption of our technology. Since the advent of cloud computing, there's a greater onus within the industry to simplify the adoption and operation of technologies within an infrastructure. Customers are trying to scale their workforce, and simplicity is a key to that scaling model. The ability for your application to have an understanding of the infrastructure, and the infrastructure to be able to query and respond and take action based on a common standard protocol is key. And so for us, SMIS means that we can offer a net new technology to a customer environment. Customers can adopt this technology and have it fit right into their native framework, say Microsoft System Center, et cetera, without having us to go off and build our own ad hoc management or third-party elements. The standard makes it easier to adopt, whether it's our emerging technology or frankly, any vendor within the industry.
I guess that's true when you think about it. You can tie into products like ServiceNow that existed before your company even did, and you get to plug into them as if you were there from day one. So it really accelerates the adoption of your products, doesn't it?
You're right. So I have a long-standing view, which is if you can make your product, if you can lower the bar to adoption on your product, and part of that means can you just directly replace the previous technology, and your product can then provide measurables that are easy to monitor. It's a great value prop for customers to move forward in terms of the technologies that they have in their data center.
Gotcha. And as you all know, that the SMIS standard is more than just about being able to manage storage. There's also a client side to it, and it also handles things like HBAs and switches as well. In fact, we've got Cisco. Here's Cisco represent as well. Again, members of the SMIS community, you guys have working code out there that's beautiful.
Well, it's the first time I've ever heard about our code being beautiful, but I'll take it. Yeah, so we kind of wind up being sort of the consumer of SMIS as well, because our software data center network manager uses SMIS to interact with our switches, our Nexus Ethernet switches and our MDS fiber channel switches, but also gain visibility into the endpoints, the HBAs on the server side as well as the array side for the targets, and that gives us the ability to use the ubiquity of that protocol for kind of a heterogeneous environment, and it gives us that kind of visibility.
Yeah, in fact, I think you guys are pretty unique in that you're both a provider and a client. I've seen a demo live on stage.
Yeah, we just can't make up our minds.
Yeah, I've seen a demo live on stage where they demoed being able to create LUNs on an array, on anybody's array, and to be able to mount those LUNs directly to a host through a Cisco switch and had it zone the Cisco switch during the operations using the SMIS protocol. And that, I believe, was through your Data Fabric Manager software.
Yeah, Data Center Network Manager.
Data Center Network
Yep.
Manager. Right.
So and in fact, I know that this is like one of the best kept secrets of the industry, actually, because I know that there are a lot of open source projects that are trying to do the exact same type of provisioning and visibility, and here is SMIS to do that, and it has been for quite a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know another company that just recently joined SMIS. In fact, in the past month is VM Turbo, who's a client company. So I mean, there's a lot of clients joining, just as there are providers. So I guess the first question is, I'll give this to Ms. Olvers if we can. If I'm going to deploy SMIS, and I kind of have to figure out what my device is, and the question then becomes, how do I implement it using the SMIS protocol? I mean, that's a massive book of pieces. How do I know what to do?
Okay, so SMIS is massive, right? We just released version, or in the middle of releasing information on version 1.7, which is comprehensive, covers pretty much every type of storage there is. And so we've organized things into profiles and books. So we start with, say, what kind of storage device do I have? And then that you look at, what books and what profiles. And then you also need to look and say, okay, what kind of clients am I working with? Am I working with, am I integrating into VMware? Am I integrating with System Center? Am I working with ServiceNow? What clients do I have? And then you can kind of narrow that down, and that all those information in those profiles, in those books, will tell you, what subset you actually need to implement. And then you can actually look and say, okay, how do I want to implement this? Do I want to do it in-house? Do I want to, work with a third party to implement it for me? And if I'm doing it, if I want to work with a third party, they can actually help you consult with that and say, do I want, which pieces do I need to do? Because they'll have some expertise there. You can also look at, if I'm building it myself, do I want to work with open source solutions? And then they've got a lot of information online. There are tools like groups within SNIA and also Google groups that you can use to consult to help you build your providers. So there's tons of resources out there to help you figure out, what is the little bits that I need to use and how do I come up to speed to help build a provider.
Maybe you could explain also, we have two different ways we can deploy the provider. We've got what's called a embedded version, and we have the agent-based version. What are those about?
Okay, so an embedded provider is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. If you have basically embedded management in your system and you want to embed the provider within the device, you can build an embedded provider. So if you have say a Linux based embedded solution, you can take something called a small footprint SIMOM, because it's all SIM, as I mentioned earlier, a common information model, SIM-based solution, and build a really actually very tiny little solution that will sit embedded in your solution. If you want to build, if your host management software is host-based, you can build what's called a proxy provider, and that runs with a host-based SIMOM. So the piece you're building is actually called the provider, and so the rest of the infrastructure is provided for you, and the SIM object model, and all you build is the little SIM provider and drop it into the infrastructure.
Yep. Now, another question for you. We have a thing at Storage Network Industry Association called the Conformance Testing Program. Now, for instance, my company's controller has just passed a 1.6 certification. I know you guys are working on a provider right now, and I know you guys have passed the 1.4 certification. Why is it that, do they need to upgrade to 1.6? What's the value of having the newest provider as opposed to continuing to ship the older 1.4?
So this again, it comes back to what clients you're working with. So certification, the certification test program actually helps sort of show your clients that you're working with where your provider, what baseline it works to. So if you're working with, Microsoft Virtual Machine Manager you want to plug into, they've basically said, here's the baseline for functionality. If you want to start working with our stuff, we want you to be at this level of functionality, and CTP is a great way to show them where you are. So you build your provider, you run it through CTP, get certified, and then they'll start answering your questions and start working with you. And that's true for pretty much any client. So if you do a newer version, say you've just built a provider, you can test it to a much newer version, and if it's newer version, say I just did, we just did 1.7, Microsoft only requires 1.5 for this functionality, that's great, that'll work too. So doesn't have to be the exact version, it's backward compatible, it'll work just fine to that one as well.
Gotcha. So in essence, you're kind of future-proofing yourself when you go with a newer provider.
Exactly. You are absolutely future-proofing yourself.
Gotcha. Now, I know we talked before about the fact that pretty much anybody can build a box of disks and wrap it around a controller and produce a SAN device. It's not that hard. And I think we've talked about, and I think you'd agree with me, that what differentiates a good product from just any old product in the market is the fact that it's manageable. The fact that you can actually give the customer something they couldn't get before. You can discover thin provisioning, you can discover what drives are in the machine, you can actually allocate new LUNs, things like that. Being able to consume that device is really, really what it's about. Because again, sheet metal, but it takes intelligence to manage it properly. And of course, SMIS is about owning the storage from the life cycle of the storage, from day one to the day you pull it off the floor. You should be able to manage that and these aren't fire and forget missiles, these are things you deploy and have to manage over time. And I think we all kind of come to that realization.
Absolutely, right, and that's where we've got our folks looking at my company and at Pure Storage and Cisco all looking to add our differentiation.
I think we're on the same page with that, Chris.
Yeah. Let's see.
He's getting serious now.
Yeah, I actually think an interesting point that you opened up with was the age of the protocol. And we talked about this life cycle, this protocol that kind of got a hot start and then kind of dipped. And I would position that maybe SMIS came to market a bit early. If you'll recall, I touched base on the impact that cloud computing's had in terms of data center operations. In many ways, SMIS today is providing an open standard model for something that's very similar to what VMware is trying to do in their space with their VASA provider. And VASA being a means for virtual machines and the infrastructure to be managed and translated back to their specifics and norms, and yet letting each independent storage provider plug into that ecosystem. I think SMIS provides that benefit on a much SMIS provides the potential benefit like VASA provider on a much broader scale because it is an industry standard protocol. Obviously, wide adoption within Microsoft, but even in recent news, adoption by Red Hat. So, cross-platform, heterogeneous, infrastructure, storage infrastructure management from the application and operating system tier. It's pretty powerful.
That's true. When you think about it, the clients really get a big benefit too because they have to code now only once for all the storage providers out there instead of having to code to each one individually. I'm sure that really lowers their cost of acquisition of putting new features into their products.
Well, that actually brings up the subject of contributing to SMIS, right? Because if you happen to be a client or a provider, you want to create the hooks into the SAS, you then have an entire ecosystem as opposed to trying to build in an entire management structure from scratch. So there's a lot of opportunity to get new features and new capabilities from companies that would not normally have the kind of resources at hand to be able to instantly get a wealth of code base to play with and make such an impact of their own inside that ecosystem. So it's a great opportunity to try to, if you happen to be providing that type of technology, to consider joining the SMIS program over time.
That's true, and there's actually an organization called SMIS Lab that gives you the ability to go into an environment, a lab infrastructure in SNIA in Colorado Springs at Storage Networking Industry Association, such that you can hit many different vendors' hardware at once. When a vendor comes to me and says, I'd like some hardware because I want to write something to manage your stuff, and he says, I'm using SMIS to do it, I just ask him, why isn't he using the lab? Because he has access to our stuff as well as everyone else's. I don't have to give free hardware to every company in the market.
Absolutely. And the PlugFest as part of the SMI Lab are a huge benefit. So about every 3 months, I think, is the cadence.
We've been doing 6 a year.
Okay, so every 2 months there are PlugFests, and sometimes some of our participating companies host them on site. So they have been, they're not always at the lab, but so sometimes at their various locations. Microsoft has hosted them, and a couple other companies have hosted them as well. So sometimes you also get to go to various locations and get access to different labs as well. But it is a great benefit because you get to go and interact with engineers from various companies to work specifically with and interact with the providers and clients that represent all those pieces of hardware as well. So you not only get access to the hardware, you get access to the engineers and the folks developing the providers and the clients, all under NDA. That information and the specifics of the NDA are available on the SNIA website, so you can go poke around at that if you have any questions about it.
Mm-hmm.
So question, roughly how many partners do you have in the SMIS ecosystem? And for those who aren't participating, where should they go to start to get engaged?
So the site to go get engaged is www.snia.org/SMIS. And you're going to find the next PlugFest is happening October 5th week in Colorado Springs. But there's one about every couple months. And we try and host them in San Jose every once in a while because it's a very popular place for that. And once a year we try and also host an international one that goes to China. But you'd be shocked at the number of people, not just the number of people that show up to these PlugFests, but from how many different places they show up. The last one we had in San Jose, for instance, we had people flying in from Germany and people flying in from India and from China. So there's a large group of people. And it's strange because we're all competing storage companies that we all get together and get along and work together at these PlugFests. It's kind of the standard for SNIA in general is competing companies working for the better good of the protocols and the standards. And speaking of protocols and standards, you guys know that the standards have been pushed through the ANSI. the ANSI standards committees, and most recently we just got the 1.5 spec pushed through ISO. So it's an international standard as well. And it sits on top of SIM, which is based on the DMTF standard. So SNIA is all about cooperation in this. Anything you guys want to add, or?
I think we're good.
All right, thank you for joining us here at Storage Developer Conference. We hope you guys are here with us somewhere in the hotel, and we hope you see a lot of good sessions. Thanks a lot.